Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. So today I decided and finally found the time to do a VR to Lisa Papez for the hashtag of Tarot FAQ. So Tarot frequently asked questions. I watched her video and I found it really interesting and I loved her questions that she came up with, and I loved that she divided the questions into, I think there were four different sections, and she grouped them together under specific topics. And I decided that I want to do a VR, but I will divide the VR into four different videos. So this will be part one. So for each section, I will have an own video because I'm really rambly, and otherwise this video would be really long. And I came up with some own questions for each of the topics as well, which I want to answer. So I will answer every question that she came up with and that she has originally put out there for this hashtag, but I will add, and I have added, some more questions under the four topics that I really, yeah, that I really wanted to answer as well. And for some parts, there will be more added questions from my side. For some other parts or topics, less. It just depends on what came to my mind. And for the first part, which will cover the topic of deck preferences, there were a lot additional questions that came to my mind and that I want to answer. So this will probably be the longest of those four parts as well. All right. I will, of course, link the original video by Lisa Papez in the video description down below, so you can watch hers and get an idea, of what she was doing, and you can see her original questions. I will mention it when I have answered all of her questions and when I entering into answering my questions that I added, but just so that you have an overview. All right, because we have a lot of questions to go through, actually 15 um, with my questions added. No, 16 actually. Let's just start right in. And the first question was, what are your thoughts on illustrated minors versus pips? So when I first started, and actually that thought or that preference changed quite recently in the last few months. Illustrated minors were a must-have for me. So if a deck, even though I loved the artwork and I loved the majors, had pips as minors, it was completely off of my wish list. I wouldn't even consider to get it, even though I loved the majors, I loved the artwork and everything about the deck. And that really frustrated me because there were some beautiful decks out there where I watched the walkthrough and was like, oh my gosh, I love this deck. And then I saw that it was a pip deck and I was like, oh, why does this have to be a pip deck? So that was my preference at that time. And still today, I have a lot more illustrated decks with illustrated minors than I have with pips. But I'm more open to pip decks. So if there is a deck out there where I really love the artwork, where I really love the illustrated majors, um, or I really like the theme, the guidebook to it, or how they even illustrated the minors, even though they are pips. I will consider getting it, and sometimes I will get it, and I'm at a point right now where I work with pips. So this is an example for a lot of my decks. It represents a lot of my tarot decks that I have currently in my collection because, as I said, I still have a lot more decks with illustrated minors than I have pip decks. And this is one of my favorites. This is the Lightseers Tarot by Chris and Donnelly. And yeah, I still sometimes prefer illustrated minors because it is just, I'm a very visual person. I love seeing gorgeous art and scenes and that stuff in my cards, and that doesn't mean that the pip minors aren't illustrated and aren't gorgeous art. They still need to be drawn and created, and there are some gorgeous ones out there. But sometimes it's just not enough for me, and it feels like it won't inspire me as much, and therefore the motivation isn't, it feels more boring for my eyes to look at, and therefore for me. Um, but I love the openness that I have with it. So a deck that isn't necessarily completely a pip deck, but I would say is a mixture of both, is the Mesquite Tarot, because there are like this, there are minors that are where you have some silhouettes and where you can see something happening. Um, Sometimes even really, like here you can see the Two of Swords and you can still see the moon and the two arrows in that case crossed. So they are illustrated in some way, the Eight of Swords. So you get a sense, but it is reduced because of its simple art style. Even the majors are sometimes more pippish in that way because you don't have a lot of going on, not a lot of symbols, not a lot of really detailed, like the Empress. You don't even have a person, you just have the Venus symbol or the female symbol here and some flowers, but it still looks gorgeous. And other minors, here you can see you have the Four of Wands. The Four of Wands here pretty decorated, but there's nothing else happening. Here the Nine of Swords, you just have the Nine Swords. You get the sense of a lot of going on in the mind because there are these clouds and they're all pointing downwards. But it's more pippish, like the Eight of Pentacles or the Five of Cups, but it's not completely pippish. You still get a hint of the RWS meaning. And that was probably my first deck that leans towards a little bit less scenic in the minors and a little bit more simpler. And then I have worked with Marseille decks and pip decks. Like this is the New Choice Tarot de Marseille. And this is, for example, one of my favorite Ace of Coins or Ace of Pentacles. In that case, Ace of Coins is probably the more fitting name. I mean, look how gorgeous that is. And there's where we get into a section or into a discussion about saying like scenic decks are illustrated minors and pips are not illustrated minors. I can't stand that when we are talking about pips being not illustrated minors. Just because there is no scene happening in here doesn't mean that they're not illustrated. If something isn't illustrated, then you would have a white sheet of paper, because these swords and these flowers or this decorative abundance and all the details in the coin, they were illustrated and they were drawn and colored in by the artists. So it's still a gorgeous art piece, even though it doesn't show people and a scene playing or happening in there. Um, so that is also a thing that and really tell me that that isn't illustrated, that that isn't a piece of art in its own, even though you're just seeing just um, a coin and some flowers and some decorations. And this deck has some gorgeous pips. I love the colors in there. I love the addition of the decorative flowers. And what I really love about this is in the little guidebook that comes with it. Um, it talks about the flower, that you can see what the flower is and why they have chosen the flower to go with this specific card in terms of meaning. So they aren't just flowers to look pretty, but they have consciously chosen the type of flower that they're putting into this specific card, and it adds to the meaning. And they have talked to they give you that information in the guidebook, which I really love. And also I just love the colors. I love how they have decorated the minors, so they're really gorgeous to look at even though there's not a lot going on. I also have the Marshmallow Marseille, which I really love and which is really gorgeous, which I want to mention. And even my probably most pip-like deck is this. This is the Ferdinando Crippa Tarocchi by Il Mene. Oh my gosh. I need to read it, otherwise I can't pronounce it. By Il Menegello. And this is probably as simple as it can get. You just have the number and the symbol of the suit. You can see that there are some differences. The cups are changing, so it's not the same in each and every card. But even here, you have the number and the cup. And for the swords, the same. So you have the number and the sword. So it's really reduced, really simple, but it's still readable. And sometimes it is really good to just see this, because especially when you lay out a huge spread, or you're at a point where you're like, I can't stand so much input, it's really refreshing and really it eases that tension up to look at every detail and look at every card. You just have this and you know, okay, the Five of Cups, that is the meaning. Finished. So it's sometimes really useful to have such simple cards. So that was a lot of rambling about only the first question. So this will be a very long video. But that is how my thoughts have changed over time as I felt more confident with the tarot system and the meanings behind the cards. To also work with pip decks and to really appreciate the magic that I have as well. All right, question number 2. How do you feel about keywords on decks? So in my collection currently, I don't have a single tarot deck that has keywords on the cards. All of my tarot decks that I have just have the title on the cards. There may be the keywords in the guidebook, but not on the cards themselves. So I can't show you a tarot deck for this question. I think with a tarot, I prefer to just have the title on the card because you get so much meaning and your own keywords out of the illustration and out of your knowledge that you already have, out of the numerology and the elemental associations and stuff. So I don't really need keywords, and I want the freedom to interpret what comes through in one specific reading and don't have to explain why that meaning that I talk about maybe doesn't really resonate with the keywords on the cards. But there are some decks out there that I have seen that have keywords on the cards where I don't really mind them because I love the artwork so much. And sometimes it's really refreshing to see keywords on the cards because it is one keyword that is like, well, I really love that keyword for this card. And it is not one of your typical ones, but it really fits into that meaning as well. And it just shifts the meaning a little bit in that frame that works, that still works for you, and opens up your horizon a little bit. Um, And I would say with these decks where I really love the artwork, I really love the deck on its own, I would still buy it even though there are keywords on the cards, because I just can ignore them. I don't have to look at them and take them as interpretation. I look at the image, I look at the title, and I'm coming up with my interpretation and start to ramble. So that is that. I know some people have problems with that when there is a keyword on the card to just ignore it. Um, but I still prefer, for me, that wouldn't be a problem. I think I could really ignore them if I want to, but I still prefer for tarot just to have titles on the cards. For oracle decks, it's really the opposite. For oracle decks, I really want keywords on the cards, or at least one keyword. Um, and so I can't stand it when oracle decks come to have a title on there and no keywords. Like you have a card, beautiful illustration, and then it says on the title, um, I don't know, the red lady in the clouds or something like that. Well, I can see that it's a lady that is dressed up in red and that is in the clouds, but I can't really do anything with that title. So either give me some keywords where I can work with, or just leave the image on its own, and then you don't need to write anything on the card, because that title is like there isn't anything on the card that is helpful for me, that is useful, or that gives me anything. So just leave it off. I don't need that. So that is what I think about those titles. I can't stand them. So either give me an oracle deck that just has this beautiful, deep, beautiful illustrations on there. But even then, I would prefer to have at least one keyword on that card so that I can really quickly, um, yeah, get a inspiration, a hint, a starting off point in a reading. But these titles are so not useful and just annoying for me. And with some oracle decks where I can understand that there are no keywords on and just the titles, because the titles make sense, especially with animal decks. Like this is the Animal Spirit from the Wild Unknown by Kim Krans. They are only saying the animal that you see on there. So that isn't an annoying title, because I want to know what animal I am looking at. But even in these decks, and also in the other deck, in the Archetypes deck, um, where it says the archetype that it's on, these titles are useful because I know what I'm looking at. So they have their use, and they're not just like a title, an imaginative title. But still, there you can see that I have modified these decks and put the keywords on there. So because I really need a jumping off point sometimes in my readings, and it's not helpful and really distracting to look in the guidebook when you can't get a starting point from the image, or your intuitive ability is sometimes slowed down. So I wrote the keywords on there. So that is how much I really like keywords on my oracle decks, and I really need them. Sometimes I will use them, sometimes I won't. It just depends on if I'm getting something from the image and how good my intuition works sometimes, or how much time I have to do a reading. Sometimes I need to look at the keywords to give me an idea, an inspiration, a jumping off point, and then I can develop my own meaning for that specific reading from that point, where at the end, maybe that keyword doesn't even matter anymore, but I needed it to get that information and to get a jumping off point. So for oracles, I really love keywords on my cards. I really need them. And for tarot, I prefer to just have my tarot titles on the cards. So, next question. How do you feel about borders? Well, it depends. It really depends. Normally, I would say I prefer borderless because I really love to see the image have its space to shine and to work with and to show itself. But sometimes there are decks where I don't mind the borders actually. So an example for that would be the Cesarabito Tarot. This has borders on it, these black borders, but they're really tiny, they're really small. And because they're black, they're not really, I don't know, they're not really distracting me from the image. I still feel that I get everything that I need to see, and that the image has room to breathe and it doesn't feel caged in or hindered or blocked in any way. So I really don't mind them. And with those decks where they have borders and I don't mind having them, they don't distract me. I oftentimes don't even see or really am really aware of that this is a deck that has borders to it. Um, Another deck that has pretty huge borders actually is the Brit's Third Eye Tarot, which you have really where with the Cesarabito they were so small and thin that you could say, okay, I can ignore them, I can overlook them. Here you really can't. They're wide, they're in your face, and they're really thick actually. But for some reason, I don't mind this deck to have these thick borders. Normally, I would say I prefer, as I said, borderless cards, borderless images. And if there is a border, make it small and thin so it's really not in your face and it's really like, yeah, ignorable. But there are some decks that have huge borders and that I really don't mind the borders, like this one. And I don't know why that is the case with some decks. Sometimes it is like where the images are so detailed and there's so much going on that you really feel like it needs a border um, to calm that a little bit down, especially when you lay a few cards next to each other. With this deck, I don't feel like it is the case. The artwork isn't as detailed and there isn't as like an overwhelm of things going on in the illustrations, and I still don't mind the borders. So I don't know what it is that sometimes I don't mind the borders even though they are huge, and sometimes I mind them. A negative example would be the Secret Tarot. This is an older edition, and this is one of those where you have the borders with a lot of different languages. So if are a lot of words on here, that is really distracting. What I don't like is also here I feel even though they wouldn't have done this with a lot of words all over the card, I still would feel that that border disturbs me. It distracts me, and I can't stand it. And I don't know why. So I really, this is one of the decks that I really want to trim because it really distracts me from the artwork. That white really doesn't function well with the probably more darker color palette. It really screams to your eyes. And then having even the like really intense blue border in there, I can't stand that. And then plus all the text on there. So this is one that I haven't trimmed, but that I will trim at some point because I can't stand the borders. So for me, normally I prefer borderless. There are borders where I don't mind them to be there. Sometimes I even prefer to have borders on the because the images are so wild, so chaotic, or there's so much going on that I really feel they need it. But if there are borders on the cards, it just has to work. Either having them being really thin and in a color that doesn't scream to your eyes, or being like they really fit to the imagery, to the feel of the cards, and melt in. But sometimes it just has to work for me. So that is that. What makes you decide to modify a deck? There are different things on here. Like with the Wild Unknown decks, I have modified them to put the keywords on the borders so that I can work with. Basically, it's just like I feel that I need to modify a deck or that I want to modify a deck when I feel like it will work for me better when I have modified it, or I can connect to it better when I have modified it. Like, for example, and sometimes it's even little things. Like, this is the Flowers of the Night Oracle, and I haven't done anything to these cards. I haven't trimmed them, I haven't put keywords or anything on there. I just have etched this in this green. And what gave me that idea was that in the box, the outside of the box was in that black, and the inside of the box has such a beautiful green in there. And I really loved seeing that combination. I don't know why. There is not really that light green maybe in here, but not really a lot of that in these cards. But I really loved seeing that combination, and I really wanted to see that on my cards as well, so I have etched it. And even though it's just a tiny thing, at a point where the cards were etched, it really was easier for me to connect to this deck and to develop a connection with this deck. Because this was actually a deck that was on my giveaway list. And then I decided to give it another chance because I really love the artwork. And I have etched it, and just that little thing really made it possible for me to connect with this deck, even though it doesn't have anything to do with the keywords, with the images, with what gives me the messages in a reading, but it really helped. And sometimes it's those small things. Another deck that I really have done a mod with is the Journey of Love Oracle by Alana Fairchild, with artwork by Rasuli and some poems that are in the guidebook by Richard Cohn. This is a deck which was also on the list to give away because I just couldn't, even though I really wanted to, I just couldn't connect to the cards, and I just couldn't read with them. And the problem with that was that this was one of the oracle decks that just had titles on the cards instead of keywords. And so even the artwork is really gorgeous and you can get a lot of it intuitively, I just needed a jumping off point. And with these titles, sometimes like with the swan, okay. But with like intimacy is one that, or she loves the choice. Of course, I can't find a title that really doesn't work right now. But Fire and Ice, Cosmic Butterfly. Like, then you have Seed of the Heart. You have here in front something else with the heart. Heart of the moment. Heart of God. Legacy of light. Like, okay, but it's not it's not working for me. So, and the guidebook by Alana Fairchild, even though it gives you a lot for each of the cards, and I love the poems in here, it's basically like for each of the card you have a text, but these texts are really too not my style. Like it's, oh, my child, my well-beloved child, and the child of God, and everything will be fine, and it's all right here. So, oh, I can't stand that. And even though you get a lot, it's oftentimes repeating. Like you have here message, and then she says basically the same thing, but in different words on the back. So it's like, okay, You could say that in 2 sentences. And sometimes the messages are even repeating throughout different cards. So that wasn't helpful either. So I really sat there and sorted some cards even out that didn't work for me at all, or that I felt like I had already a card with that meaning in my deck. And with the other cards, I really sat there and put my own keywords on there so that I can use it, so that I have a keyword to work with, that it functions. I also etched this deck in this gorgeous purple, which is also a small thing, but it really helped me to connect with it again. And now it works for me, and I'm really happy that I took the time to do that because I love, love, love the artwork. And I was really sad that I couldn't work with it. And now I did. So basically, what makes me decide to mod a deck is when I have the feeling that when it's modded, it helps me to connect with the deck, or it makes it easier to work with it. Or another example is this Lenormand deck. This is a Christmas-based Lenormand. It is called the Winter Wonderland Lenormand, and I have took all the borders down. And this was basically a standard playing card size. Now it's the size of a mini Lenormand, like the Media Lenormand or the 1889 Lenormand in the mini version, because I found the borders so distracting. Like, look at this. I mean, these borders are horrible, at least in my opinion. And here I even have trimmed the bottom border down. But look at, and the images are so gorgeous. But with those borders, you really couldn't focus on the gorgeous images, even though they are sometimes really cheesy, but they're still gorgeous. So that is the reasons for me to modify a deck. So I really need to speed this up. This video is already half an hour long and I have an appointment that I need to make. What kind of cardstock is your favorite? And there I have to pull the New Choice Tarot de Marseille again, because I prefer matte over glossy. It's not like I hate glossy cardstock. I have a lot of decks that have glossy cardstock and I still work with them and I still love them. But if I have a choice, I prefer matte. But not rose petal. It needs to be matte that feels really nice. This feels really smooth when you rub it. So it's a textile experience. It feels awesome, but it needs to be a matte where the cards don't stick together like with rose petal or with some matte finishes. They are too smooth, too soft, too, I don't know what they do with that, which I really like the feel of, but then you have some chunks of cards that stick together and it's really a struggle to shuffle them. With this, you have gorgeous matte cardstock, no sheen at all. It still feels smooth to it, but the cards aren't sticking together at all. And they also make a gorgeous sound. I don't know if you have heard that or not, but it's beautiful. So, some soft, smooth, buttery, matte cardstock that doesn't stick together. Next one. Oh, and in terms of thickness, I prefer thinner cardstock over thicker cardstock. And by that, I don't mean that I like my cards to be really flimsy and like a sheet of paper, but I like them to be thinner than like having a deck where the cards are so thick that you feel like you have 2 or 3 cards in a hand and it's actually only one. Because for me that really makes it harder to shuffle, even though I'm not a riffle shuffler. But when the cards are too thick, they won't slide into each other, but they won't stick on top of each other because they're so thick. So I really don't like really thick cardstock. And I even prefer the really thin Llewellyn cardstock over really thick one, because I can really easily shuffle that. And even though it is really thin, they still hold up quite well. And they don't feel like I can't shuffle them because they're so thin that I would damage the cards. Okay, what are your thoughts about gilding? This was a question which wasn't in the video description of Lisa's video, but I think she has mentioned it in her video where she talked about cardstock. I don't mind gilding. I actually love gilding sometimes when I don't have to do it on my own, but when it's still on the cards and it's gorgeous. Like one of my favorite gildings is this gorgeous, amazing holographic gilding of the This My Tarot. Um, I love holographic foil. But sometimes I really love like the Bad Bitches Tarot by Athene has a rose gold gilding which I really love. Um, and sometimes I really love your traditional gold or silver gilding on the cards, like the Awakened Soul Oracle. This is the first edition, has silver gilding on it. I really like that. Sometimes I don't mind when the cards aren't gilded or edged in any way, because then I can decide on my own which color works for me. Because sometimes some decks are out there that have a gold gilding on them where I feel like, I don't feel like that gold really matches this deck. I would prefer that color to be on there because that would really fit for me. And when it's already gilded, I can't decide this on my own and I have to live with it being gold edges, even though I don't feel like it works for that deck. So there are pros and cons. All right, next one. Now we are into the questions that I came up with. So, do you have size preferences? And in terms of size preferences, yes, I have. I prefer actually, especially for tarot decks, but also for oracle decks, your standard tarot size cards. Like this is an oracle deck, but it's still tarot size, and I think tarot size is a good size to handle. You can easily get your hands around. It is good to shuffle and manage. It is also a size where you can do a layout with multiple cards, even though you haven't a lot of room or space to do that. So I prefer that, and it is also a size where you can still see the imagery really well and some details. With oracles, I don't mind them being bigger because that is just what I'm used to, because a lot of oracles out there have that standard oracle size. Um, and sometimes it is even useful to have the cards being bigger when the artwork is really detailed or really gorgeous, so you can really dive into it and see every detail. But it has to be a size where I'm still able to handle the cards. Like the Awakened Soul Oracle by Athene. This is the first edition, I think. Yes, this is the first edition. Now she has the second edition up, where I think she made the cards a little bit smaller, because this is a size where it's just on the point of being too big. Because as you can see, I can barely get my fingers around, and I'm an overhand shuffler. It is a stretch. So it's really on that fine line of, okay, this is just the size that I can handle with a stretch, but if it would be 1 or 2 millimeters larger, it would be too large. And I also really love tiny, cutie mini decks, especially with Lenormand, because when you do a grand tableau, it is really useful to have so many cards to do it, because you don't really need a lot of space to even do a grand tableau, which is really good when you're doing readings, when you're outside, when you're traveling. So I ordered a Media and the 1889 and more in the mini version. And just so you can see the size difference, this is a standard tarot deck from the Lightseers Tarot, and this is the mini. And also I find them really handy to, put into your handbag to take it with you when you're on travel. And also I find them really, really cute. And especially with the Normand, I think it works really well because you don't need to see a lot of details. It's just about one thing that the card is representing. So I have a fable for mini decks. All right, next question, collage or not in terms of artwork. For me, I prefer illustrated artwork, drawn or painted art. Collage isn't really my favorite art style, but there are some exceptions to the rule. Not a lot, I have to say. But there are some other, like the Moonchild Tarot has a gorgeous collage which really speaks to me. Um, or even what is it called? The other tarot deck by Chris Ann Donnelly, like the Muse Tarot, that has a collage to it that I really like as well. And these two are on my wish list to get. I also have the Inner Compass Oracle, which is also collage. Which has some gorgeous art pieces in here. Like this is really beautiful. Or this I really like, even though it is collage, and I'm actually not a collage fan. And another exception to the rule is the Texture Tarot by Lisa McLaughlin. And also the Enchanted Tarot by Amy Zerner and Monty Faber. These are collage decks that, even though it is not my preferred art style, and sometimes it really is like, it isn't really artwork that I would hang on my wall in a lot of the images, even though there are some exceptions. But I really like how they are done. So if it's a good collage, and if I really like the symbols that they have used, and I really like how they have depicted the cards, then I also buy collage decks or put them on my wish list. But yeah, I prefer painted or drawn images over collage still. It is just my personal art style preference. But as I said, I'm not completely closed off to it. It just really has to be my style. It really has to be good in my opinion, and it really has to give me something, and it really has to work with the meaning of the card as well. And some are out there, but not a lot. Since we are at art style, your favorite art style. My favorite art style is actually illustrated, drawn, or painted, and especially when it comes to watercolor. I love watercolor. This is the Fauna Inspiration cards, and this is with painted with watercolor or colored in with watercolor. I really love the how watercolor behaves, the effects that watercolor give to illustrations. So I really love that. Another thing that I really love, one of my favorite artists and favorite depictions is Stephanie Puman Law and her Shadowscapes Tarot, but also some other illustrations that she does over on her Instagram. These are art pieces that I even would hang on my wall or use for decorative purposes. She also uses watercolor, so you can see a theme in here. She draws them personally, so it's not like collage or photo or even digital. And I really love this. So that is my favorite art style. There are also some other art styles that I really love, like the Lightseers Tarot, that art. I still have it here, is absolutely amazing as well. And I'm not even sure if that is really hand drawn or if it's already in the digital art category, but it's still gorgeous. But my absolute favorite would be those watercolor hand drawn illustrations. All right. Next one, how do you feel about reusing artwork or art pieces, like from older ages, like antique art pieces, Renaissance art pieces, and create a tarot or oracle deck with that? I don't have any of these currently in my collection. There are some that are on my wish list. Um, I think when they're really thoughtful done, then I think there are gorgeous decks out there, and you can really create gorgeous decks with that because there are gorgeous, amazing art pieces out there. But you really need to put your thought behind, you really need to um, really want to put that effort and that time into there to really search for images that really work, especially with tarot. Um, and when you have done that, and when it's really good done and really thoughtful done, then I think that it can be a really good tarot deck. Um, and then there are others out there where there's not so many thoughts put in there, and then it can really fail and it can really not work at all, especially like with tarot. So that are my thoughts on that. Do you want reversible bags? For me, that's a no, especially because I don't use physical reversals with my cards. That just throws me off to see an image upside down. And some of my favorite bags aren't reversible, like with the 1889 Lenormand. Like, this is an amazing art piece. That is an art piece for the back of the cards, which could fit uh which you could hang on your wall. It's an art piece on your wall. It's an art piece on its own, and it's really gorgeous, and it really fits with the deck itself. And it's not reversible at all. So that is that. Also, one of my favorite bags is this from the Marshmallow Marseille. Again, holographic foil. I love it. This might even be, no, it isn't reversible because of that. Um, But yeah, so I don't mind if the bags aren't reversible. I just don't like text on my bags. Um, so that is that. Next, what is a perfect guidebook for you? Or do you want a guidebook at all? Or it's just, well, I don't need a guidebook. I don't read them. Um, I don't, I don't, yeah, mind being a guidebook there or not. So for me, I really like to have guidebooks, even though I may not use them at all again, and I just use the cards and the messages that come through with the keywords or what comes through intuitively. But I really love to be a good guidebook with the deck. Um, because when there is a guidebook, I love to read through those. And what I really love by having a guidebook is actually to be able to see where the artist or the creator of the deck comes from, what their thoughts are about the illustrations, about why they have chosen to depict a specific card in that way. Um, and yeah, about their thoughts about the meaning of a card and what comes to their mind when they think about a keyword or think about a tarot card. So I really love to have that as like, um, yeah, have another perspective and seeing some different things and learn and develop from that as well. So that is a thing that I really love having in a guidebook, really having mentioned what you're seeing on the card and describing why they have depicted it that way and tying that the illustration and the symbols that they have used in with the meaning of the card. That is what I really love. I also really love when they give really good meanings, like Anthony's Guidebook for the Bad Bitches Tarot. Like you have the meaning for each and every card with like a general meaning, a love meaning, a business meaning, a finance meaning, and a reversed or block meaning. So I really love that. And even though it is not a lot, you still um, get something out of that. And I love her writing style as well. You really feel her personality in how she writes. So I really love that. Another guidebook that I really love is the Aboriginal Dreamtime Oracle Guidebook by Mel Brown. And this is actually a deck where I use the guidebook with every time that I use this deck. Not because I can't use the cards intuitively, because there are keywords on the cards, which makes sense a lot of the times. Um, but what she does is she gives a story for each of the cards. So you have your interpretation here, but this whole section is actually really written like a story. And so I will read the story when I pull a card, and you get so much out of that story. So much emotions, interpretation, meaning, lessons. So I really like that. Other guidebooks that I want to mention are guidebooks by Barbara Moore. She has written a lot of guidebooks also for mass market decks like the Shadowscapes, the Tarot of the Hidden Realms, the Steampunk Tarot, and a lot more. And there is a reason for that because her guidebooks are really substantial and they're not alike. Even though she has written a lot of guidebooks, you don't get the same meanings over and over again, what you may think, because it is from the same person. She really goes into the energy and the theme of a deck. She really goes into what is depicted in the card. Like this is the Tarot of the Hidden Realms, and this section right here is basically talking about the illustration and what is happening in some kind of a story way, so you can really feel what that character is feeling in that moment. And I love that. Also from the Shadowscapes, you have a section which is more like a story tile, which a story section, which really describes what is going on in the card. And so that you can really feel what that character feels. So I really love that as well. What package do you prefer? I don't like tag boxes at all because those tag boxes are really useless actually. They just don't hold up to the use of opening and closing them as many times as you need if you really use the decks. And I really prefer boxes over bags as well because it is just it feels more cleaned up when I have my boxes really ordered in the shelf as when I have bags lying around. But that's just me. My favorite ones are sturdy boxes, and actually the boxes that have a magnetic flip and open up like this. So this is the box from the This My Tarot. There are a lot out there that have such boxes. Or like with the Spacious Tarot, where you have the boxes, this hasn't a magnetic flip, but it's still opening up that way. I really love that. What I also don't like, these Llewellyn boxes. They have the magnetic flip, they have a ribbon inside, the guidebook and the cards are fitting into the box, but the boxes are really huge. And so huge that I can't really store them in my shelves because they take a lot of space where I could probably then 2 or 3 decks store in that space where one box needs by Llewellyn. And it's really more frustrating because those boxes are so gorgeous that it really hurts me to just put them away and not using them. But I still can't. I just can't because they need a lot of room. What I also really love is when the guidebook and the deck fits in the box and you don't have a separate guidebook. Because I really love to have everything that fits together and that goes together, really having that physically together as well. Um, and when the guidebook is so small that it can fit into a handy box, which doesn't take a lot of space. I know why Llewellyn is doing this because oftentimes they have Barbara Moore guidebooks, which are really substantial, and I really love all the information that you are getting there. So putting that into a small guidebook, which would fit into a small box, wouldn't probably even possible. But that is a thing that I don't like, having these huge boxes. All right, so the second to last question. What do you feel, or what are your thoughts about nudity in cards? And for me, I haven't a problem with nudity in cards, actually. Sometimes I really like having nudity because for me, it's like it is about authenticity. It is about showing yourself the way you are and not hiding behind a mask, accepting who you are, having that confidence to show you in that way, but also having the confidence to be vulnerable with that. Um, so that is what I interpret into a thing, into illustration when I see nudity. And I actually have some decks where it's basically all about nudity. And I'm not saying that I'm running about nude all the time. I love being dressed, but having nudity in my decks doesn't really, yeah, I don't mind it. I actually love it. So this is the Naked Truth Oracle by Hand Me That Pencil. This is an independent published deck. You can get it over on Etsy. And this is a deck where basically every single card and every single person is nude. But I don't mind it, especially in this deck, because you don't feel like it's not in your face nudity. It's not overly sexualized or whatever. It just feels natural. And I really like that you can see the different body types, body diversity in this deck, like really, mm, um, really bodies with masculine energy, the different skin colors, really thin, really curvy bodies. So I really like that. Another thing that I really like is the Slattest Tarot, which is a deck where you have nudity in some cards and it is more sexualized as well. And you can see that over in the title of this deck, but I really love this deck and I really have a deep connection to this deck, especially with the entries in the PDF guidebook. I use this deck only with the entries in the PDF guidebook. It has some really deep and some really thought-provoking messages in there, which you don't necessarily would have thought when you see those sexualized images, but it really gives you some deep, emotional, thought provoking messages. So I really love that. And I don't mind that nudity either. And the last question is, what do you think about black and white decks? So for me, I prefer color. I prefer having color in my decks. I only have 3 black and white decks right now in my collection, and that is because I really love the artwork, and so it doesn't matter that those are black and white. Um, and that is the Media Lenormand, which is actually more gray, black, white, gray, and sometimes even a little bit more cream color. Then the Oh god, Dark Days Tarot, which is the only tarot deck that I have that is black and white, but I really love the images in this deck, and it really goes its own way in some of the cards, so it's really thought-provoking. I also love the square card shape, and this is my favorite, or one of my favorite Knight of Pentacles. So I don't mind being in black and white, and also it recognizes, or it has a reason for it to be black and white, because it is at nighttime under moonlight. Um, and the other one is the Witchwood Tarot, which is also black and white, but this is also more of a Lenormand style oracle deck. So you have like the river, the flame, and you can put your own keywords and meanings on that specific object that you are seeing. So, and maybe the Clair de Lune Lenormand, but it has some shades of blues and yellows in there mixed in, and that has also the reason for its color palette, because it's also under moonlight, and Anna Turian's illustrations are amazing. But in general, I really prefer colored decks, and I have give away some black and white decks because it just bores me to just see black and white, and therefore I couldn't really connect with them, and I wasn't really excited to use them at all. So there are some exceptions to the rule, but not a lot. So that is that. All right, a really, really long video, and that was only part one. The next part won't be as long because there are only 7 questions right now, because I only came up with 2 additional questions to Lisa's questions. But this one was a really long one because we had really a lot of questions to go through, because I came up with a lot of additional questions as well. And I'm a really rambly person. So I still hope you enjoyed this video. I still hope it was in some ways entertaining or helpful, even though it is a really long one. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate if you watched the whole thing through, or even if you had to make a pause, but came back to watch the second part later. Really appreciate that, and thank you for that. And yeah, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you to Lisa yeah, to that beautiful format and all of these gorgeous questions. And I will see you in the next part. Bye.